Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Här är våra rubriker. Trump utser Kinahök och wallstreet-profil till handelsminister. Putin uppdaterar Rysslands kärnvapendoktrin. Nato-chefen ser fram emot att arbeta med Trump. 45 före detta lagstiftare och demokratiaktivister dömda till fängelse. EUs ekonomi släpar efter USAs ekonomi. Den tillträdande presidenten Donald Trump har meddelat ytterligare en nominering. Wall Street-veteranen Howard Lutnick står på tur att leda handelsdepartementet. Tullar är en stor del av Trumps ekonomiska agenda. Under Trumps valkampanj uttryckte Lutnick stöd för en 60% tull på kinesisk import. Här är mer.
USAs tillträdande president Donald Trump sa den 19 november att han kommer att nominera Wall Street-veteranen Howard Lutnick till chef för handelsdepartementet. Detta innebär att investmentbankiren kommer att leda Trumps handels- och tullstrategi för den myndighet som har blivit USAs främsta vapen mot Kinas techsektor. Han är en långvarig vän till Trump och stödjer hans vision att föra tillbaka tillverkningsjobb till USA och främja kryptovalutor. Han är en stor förespråkare för tullar, särskilt riktade mot Peking. Enligt New York Times sa han i en podcastintervju i förra månaden, citat, beskatta inte vårt folk, tjäna pengar istället, lägg tullar på Kina och tjäna 400 miljarder dollar. Lutnicks utnämning var ett bakslag för två andra Trump-anhängare som hade tävlat om jobbet på handelsdepartementet, inklusive den tidigare småföretagsadministratören Linda McMahon. CNN rapporterade på tisdagen att Trump väntas utse henne till utbildningsminister istället, med ansvar för en avdelning som Trump föreslog skulle avskaffas under sin kampanj. McMahon är medgrundare och tidigare vd för den professionella wrestlingkoncernen WWE. Hon var en stor bidragsgivare till Trump under hans första presidentvalskampanj och var chef för Small Business Administration i miljardärens första regering. Trump sa också på tisdagen att han hade valt tv-personligheten och kirurgen Dr. Mehmet Oz till administratör för Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Den omfattande myndigheten har årliga utgifter på 2,6 biljoner dollar och driver Medicare och Medicaid som tillsammans tillhandahåller sjukförsäkring till över 140 miljoner amerikaner. Trump lovade under sin kampanj att inte skära i Medicare, men han förväntas låta federala subventioner för Medicaid löpa ut i slutet av 2025. Myndigheten hanterar också en stor del av sjukförsäkringsregistreringen enligt Affordable Care Act, även känt som Obamacare. Trump och andra republikaner har tidigare försökt att upphäva lagen, men säger nu att de bara vill se över den. Den tillträdande presidenten sa att Oz kommer att ha ett nära samarbete med Robert F. Kennedy Jr. som han nominerat till att leda Department of Health and Human Services.
NTD pratade med Dr. Scott Atlas om Trumps nominering av Dr. Mehmet Oz som chef för USAs hälso- och sjukvårdsprogram Medicare och Medicaid. Scott Atlas är senior fellow vid Stanfords Hoover Institution, tidigare rådgivare för Vita husets Coronavirus Task Force och värd för Independent Health Policy podcast.
Dr. Atlas, thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here.
Now, Doctor, I want to get your thoughts on RFK Jr.'s nomination in just a moment. A lot to talk about there. But on Dr. Mehmet Oz, there are 68 million people enrolled in Medicare, 80 million in Medicaid. What changes, if any, should these people expect?
Well, I'm not sure what they should expect, but what I hope happens is that, first of all, we need to preserve, but also strengthen, improve Medicare. And the way to do that is to increase choice and competition, because the prices of care have to come down. And if you want to push down prices of care by government decree, you're going to reduce the availability of medical care. That's how single payer systems do it. And they have worse outcomes in every major disease and cancer, et cetera. And that's not what I think President Trump has in mind. I think we need to reduce the prices of all health care so that we can improve access and quality, because that's the only way, competition, that you get both things to happen. You get prices to come down and quality to improve. And, the other thing to do, I think, for Medicaid is very important. In the U.S., we have a lot of politicians who have expanded Medicaid with massive hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money, and it's really a substandard healthcare system. It's a second-class healthcare system, and they pat themselves on the back for that. That's not exactly what I would want to do. What I want to do is make Medicaid a bridge to the excellence of American healthcare that we all enjoy and that, frankly, all the congressmen enjoy, rather than pretend that you're doing something great by calling people who are low income and poor insured by giving them substandard healthcare. Again, part of the key there is increasing competition, bringing down prices while improving quality.
Now, Doctor, I don't know if the high prices you're talking about are related to this, but in Trump's statement today, he said that Oz will work with RFK to, quote, address the illness industrial complex. What is your understanding of that?
Well, I think that Bobby Kennedy really raises some critical questions here. First of all, in a general sense, the healthcare as an economic sector is the most regulated sector in the economy, and there's a massive amount of fraud and waste, including in Medicare and Medicaid. That has to go, and I think there's a big focus of the Trump administration now on getting rid of that sort of waste of money. The second part is that health is contaminated with political agendas. And this is really obvious in the NIH, where they've got this big DEI effort going. They just released a 63-page report. I mean, all that is not the role of the NIH. That has to go. We have to depoliticize things and focus on what's the big healthcare issues. And this is, again, what Bobby Kennedy is stressing. First of all, proving safety before we start injecting our children or ourselves with drugs. That's critical. Secondly, really getting rid of the corruption. There's a lot of pharma corruption. There's a lot of other kinds of corruption going on in the healthcare sector, in the FDA, in the NIH, in the CDC. Some of these employees share royalties with the industries that they regulate and approve products from. Okay, that's an overt conflict of interest, and Bobby Kennedy knows that he wants to get rid of that. And the other thing we want to do, I think, is very much in concert with what he's doing, is focusing on the really critical number one disease in the United States in terms of its morbidity, its cost on health, as well as its actual cost money-wise, and that is obesity. We can't continue to be this culture where we somehow make it, out of political correctness, we glamorize obesity. I think we've all seen for the last couple decades women's fashions magazines putting morbidly obese women on the cover and saying this is the new healthy. Okay, right. This is ridiculous. We need to get rid of that and make it the reality, which is that being overweight and obese is extremely harmful to your health. And I think he wants to target the nutritional side of that to make sure that we become healthy again.
Right. Doctor, a couple of things I want to ask you on that. A lot to unpack here. The first one is, you mentioned these agencies are sharing royalties with businesses, these health agencies, public health agencies. Can you just explain that for us?
Sure. Over the decade prior to the pandemic, over 10 years, it was exposed that $325 million of royalties were shared with NIH employees from the drugs that they research and help end up putting in information on that will serve to regulate and approve those drugs. Okay, that's an overt conflict of interest. I think people are shocked to learn that, but that's in the government accountability paper. So we can't have shared royalties and getting, frankly, it's not clear necessarily that people are evil. It's more clear, though, that there is a conflict of interest. You cannot be objective. That's the term, conflict of interest. We have to remove that. Secondly, there's another problem going on, which is that there's sort of a revolving door between people that approve devices or drugs, and then they go and serve on the advisory boards of those very companies. We saw that during, frankly, the last Trump administration, but it was not unique to them. Scott Gottlieb, who was in the president's ear about waiting for the vaccine, was on the advisory board of Pfizer. Okay, Steve Hahn was the head of FDA in the Trump administration when I was there, and he went and they approved Moderna's vaccine for COVID. And then Steve Hahn is now working for one of the companies that is one of the owners of Moderna. So, I mean, it's not just them. This has been going on for decades. We don't want to eliminate the the crossover between private sector and government, because we want people who are good to come in from private sector and work in government. We want people who are good from government to work in the private sector, but there has to be something done there to stop that, again, conflict of interest.
Right.
What we don't want to do, by the way, is to completely create a 100% bureaucratic class. That is one of the big problems I hope that Bobby Kennedy addresses, which is we have these career bureaucrats who really control the American public through the agencies. They're not really accountable to the public because they're not elected. Right. So they take over. This is what people mean by the deep state. When there's career bureaucrats accruing power, like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and others that have really spent their entire careers running things in the government agencies.
So you think that RFK could possibly eliminate some of this perceived conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest? Another thing, Dr. Atklish, you brought up, there's fraud and waste in Medicare and Medicaid that's pushing up prices. Can you give some examples of that, please?
Well, sure. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud and waste in those programs in California alone. There are multiple documented studies going through this stuff. Now, because what happens, as you can imagine, when you have a bureaucracy and a regulatory system that is so overwhelming, you said we spend, hundreds of billions of dollars on these things. It becomes quite complicated. And this is one of the things we want to do, in my opinion, is get government away from healthcare itself. There's no reason to think that government should be an insurer for healthcare. They don't know anything about, I'm not sure why people think government is the answer. When they get involved in things, they're not doing things as well generally as private sector. Government should help people who are poor and low income afford things. But my view is that we should get government and government regulations that impede competition and therefore artificially prevent price competition. Let's force transparency with the government, get rid of the fraud and waste, and make healthcare providers, doctors, hospitals, post their prices. Let's see their results. Let's have them compete for the patients and have the patients control the money.
Right. And doctor, since RFK's name was floated, there's been talk about possible changes to the vaccine schedule, the food pyramid, even government food subsidies, etc. A lot of things that may not have been on the radar for people before that. What changes should Americans expect, especially Americans with young kids at school?
Well, I think the biggest concern of, if I may speak for what Bobby Kennedy's saying, and I don't, I'm just giving you my take on it, is he's really pushing more for having vaccines and other drugs prove safety, prove efficacy. Let's see the data. And I think any parent, I'm a father, I don't want to inject my children with drugs that aren't proven to be safe. In fact, I don't want to take anything that's not proven to be safe. Is that happening
at the moment?
Well, there's a paucity of data on vaccine and on vaccine safety. And I think that some of these things need to be flushed out. And if the data is there, let's see the data. I think one thing that the public should be aware of is that Bobby Kennedy's bringing up very important questions. You shouldn't be worried about the question. If my bottom line is that if you're worried about the question, then you must be nervous that you don't have the answer.
So you're saying there's some data on these. I know I had heard in the past that Bobby Kennedy, he wanted some of these perhaps reports, pieces of research that are not public at the moment to be made public. Is this an accurate assessment of things?
Well, I'm not speaking for him, but I could tell you that the people in government, they work for us. We can't lose sight of that. They're employees. Everyone in the FDA, the CDC, the NIH, the executive branch, the president, they're employees of the American people. Okay? We want to see the data. One of the biggest problems I think that we saw during the pandemic was this idea that the government and the people in public health leadership are going to persuade us by telling us what to do, by mandating our behavior. No, that's not acceptable. Let's see the information. This is a free country. We want to have the ability to make decisions for ourselves. And again, I'll bring up that I think one of the things, if I may guess, that Bobby Kennedy is saying is, okay, that's fine. They have vaccines and things and offer vaccines and drugs and everything else, but there's no room for mandating these things. This is a free country. Right. I can't imagine having a country claim it's free, but force you to inject yourself with certain drugs.
Right. We see this with the vaccine schedule for young kids all across the country. This is true. Now, about a minute left, Doctor. You were an advisor to President Trump during the pandemic, but you were also critical about the government's handling of the pandemic. You didn't support the vaccine or mask mandates, the lockdowns or school closures. What for you are the main lessons to take away from that period?
Well, there are several lessons. One of them is we can't have career bureaucrats delegated authority. Okay, these people are not necessarily experts. As a public, we must understand the era of trusting people based on their title alone. It should be over. We have to be critical thinkers. I saw a really huge amount of incompetence and lack of critical thinking. Secondly, we don't run the country by mandates. We run the country, in my desire would be to give information, to show the data. People are intelligent people. We trust adults to take information and, let them make decisions. I don't think mandates should ever be done. There's never a time to do a lockdown. That is against standard pandemic management. In fact, the lockdowns killed and destroyed millions of people, and they failed. And that's the data over and over again. And so that's a big lesson. And the bigger lesson, sort of in a general sense, is we don't manage people by fear. Okay, that's what was done during this pandemic. The media was complicit in this, by the way. I hate to say it, that's your field. But the government was really pushing people by fear rather than giving them information, letting people understand. I can guarantee if you show people the information and they determine that they're going to die if they walk outside, for instance, in hypothetical, they're not going to walk outside. You don't have to tell them they must stay inside. Secondly, these things were done grossly wrong. We need many more people from the outside to come in, because the people in government that have been there for their whole careers, particularly, they're bureaucrats. They don't necessarily have the expertise. Right. They're not able to be challenged on the data. We need a whole new look at what was done. But we're in a free country. We can never forget that. These kind of mandates, completely unacceptable.
Right. A lot to unpack. Dr. Scott Atlas, we appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
President Vladimir Putin har uppdaterat Rysslands kärnvapendoktrin. Åtgärden kommer 2 dagar efter att president Biden gav Ukraina grönt ljus att slå till mot mål i Ryssland med amerikansk tillverkade vapen. Här är mer.
Den uppdaterade doktrinen innebär att en aggression från en icke-kärnvapenstat med stöd av ett kärnvapenland kommer att behandlas som en gemensam attack mot Ryssland. Den ryska regeringen har tidigare signalerat att ett amerikanskt godkännande skulle innebära en farlig upptrappning av kriget i Ukraina. Kreml säger att den reviderade militärdoktrinen i teorin kommer att sänka ribban för när den första användningen av kärnvapen sker. En talesperson sa att Ryssland kan komma att använda kärnvapen om landet eller Vitryssland angrips med konventionella vapen.
Nordkoreas Kim Jong-un uppmanar till utbyggnad av kärnvapenstyrkorna mot bakgrund av USAs påstådda hot.
Och Nordkoreas ledare Kim Jong-un uppmanar till gränslös expansion av sitt kärnvapenprogram för att motverka USA-ledda hot. Hans kommentarer markerar också hans första direkta kritik av Washington sedan Trumps valseger. Kim kritiserade USA för att ha uppdaterat sina strategier för kärnvapenavskräckning med Sydkorea samt att stärka ett militärt trepartssamarbete med Japan. Kim beskrev alliansen som ett asiatiskt NATO och sa att den eskalerar spänningarna och instabiliteten i regionen. Han kritiserade också USA för dess stöd till Ukraina mot en långvarig rysk invasion.
Samtidigt som spekulationerna om att alliansen mellan USA och NATO kommer att förändras under Trumps nya mandatperiod ökar, sade Nato-chefen den 14 november att han ser fram emot att arbeta med den tillträdande presidenten Donald Trump. Här är Nato-chefen Mark Rutte i Lettland.
I look forward to work with Donald Trump. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran working together. The US understands this, that NATO is there not only to defend Europe and the US, but also to work together to make sure that the Indo-Pacific and the transatlantic stay safe. We need more defense spending, and we need increased defense production across the alliance. To have the right forces, but also to have the right capabilities to keep our people safe.
Rutte sa att Trump kommer att, citat, göra allt som behövs för att försvara USA och att den tillträdande presidenten är fullt medveten om NATOs kritiska roll i USAs försvar. Ruttes kommentarer bröt tystnaden om huruvida Trump kommer att minska samarbetet med alliansen. Han tog också upp Nordkoreas soldater som är aktiva inom Rysslands gränser för att hjälpa till i kriget, samt Kinas stöd till Moskva. Han påpekade att dessa hot inte bara riktas mot Europa utan också Japan, Sydkorea och USAs fastland. Rutte sa att han är övertygad om att han och Trump kommer att återuppta sin dynamik mellan arbete och vänskap och påpekade att de talade i telefon så sent som i förra veckan. Den tidigare nederländske premiärministern har nu suttit på sin post i NATO i nästan 2 månader.
45 före detta lagstiftare och demokratiaktivister dömdes den 19 november i Hongkong till fängelsestraff på mellan 4 till 10 år. Ntd's Daniel Monahan berättar mer om detta och familjemedlemmarnas reaktioner.
It was the biggest national security case under a communist China imposed law that crushed a once thriving pro-democracy movement.
De ställdes inför rätta enligt 2020 års nationella säkerhetslag för sina roller i ett inofficiellt primärval. Åklagarna hävdade att aktivisternas syfte var att lamslå Hongkongs regering. Bland de dömda fanns den tidigare studentledaren Joshua Wong, som en gång i tiden var ansiktet utåt för den prodemokratiska rörelsen i Hongkong. Han dömdes till 4 år och 8 månader. Juristen Benny Tai fick det längsta straffet på 10 år. Tai ansågs allmänt som organisatören av det inofficiella primärvalet. Henrik Louis dömdes till mer än 4 års fängelse. Efter domen skrek hans adoptivmor Elsa Wu och ifrågasatte varför han måste åka i fängelse. Hon skrek att han är en god människa. Hon fördes sedan bort i en polisbil. Philip Bowring är gift med den anklagade Claudia Mo, journalist och politiker i Hongkong.
It's nearly 4 years actually already, so I suppose, maybe it's not too much longer.
Chan Po-Yings make dömdes till 6 år och 9 månader.
But I want to emphasize one thing very clear, that it is unfair trial and it's an unreasonable trial. So even one day, they don't deserve to be in the prison.
Emilia Wong säger att hennes pojkväns dom kommer att ha en avskräckande effekt på andra.
Of course it will silence more people because you see how a primary can be illegal and lead to 10 years of sentencing. So of course it will silence more people.
2 av de 47 som ursprungligen åtalades frikändes tidigare i år. De övriga erkände sig antingen skyldiga till eller befanns skyldiga till omstörtande verksamhet. Roxy Hogue, chef vid USAs konsulat i Hongkong, kritiserade urholkningen av de politiska friheterna och yttrandefriheten i Hongkong.
The US government and the condemns the continuous prosecution of individuals here in Hong Kong.
The majority of the 45 people sentenced Tuesday had already served nearly 4 years behind bars. Daniel Monahan, Ntd News.
Vi är snart tillbaka.
En föreställning som verkligen betyder något. För var och en av oss. Detta är vad du har väntat på. Se den minst en gång i livet. Gan Jing. Köp biljetter nu på känjin.com.
USAs ekonomi var lika stor som hela EUs ekonomi 2008. Nu är USAs ekonomi 50% större. Analytiker pekar på en viktig anledning. Här är mer.
USAs bruttonationalprodukt var lika stor som EUs BNP 2008. Nu är USAs 50% större.
We are overregulating and underinvesting.
Frankrikes president Emmanuel Macron sa i ett tal vid Berlin Global Dialogue i början av oktober att EU kan komma att dö.
If we follow our classical agenda, we will be out of the market. I have no doubt.
Under de senaste åren har USA skapat de flesta av världens mest värdefulla företag. Men hur många har Europa skapat? Inga alls.
It's gonna get a lot worse.
Ekonomen Daniel Lacaille säger att Europas problem med överreglering är enormt och är inte lätt att lösa.
It's a very political entity. There are hundreds and hundreds of political bodies that try to present themselves as useful by creating new legislation all the time.
Lacaille säger att det nästan är som om EU-politikerna tävlar om vem som kan skapa flest lagar. Vissa erkänner problemet men gör ingenting för att lösa det.
We need to find ways to be more efficient in terms of how we address it so that instead of this being an onerous paperwork exercise, it actually doesn't take away the resources and the budget from driving the business.
Alina Timofeva är rådgivare till teknikföretag i EU. Hennes kunder säger att de önskar att tillsynsmyndigheterna var mer transparenta med vad de vill. Företagen säger också att förhastade regleringar verkligen bromsar dem. USA och EU står tillsammans för över en tredjedel av världens BNP. Och Kinas BNP ökar kraftigt och uppgår nu till nästan 18 biljoner dollar.
Nu när julen närmar sig, har du någonsin undrat vad som krävs för att bli jultomte? För att en grupp av Londons jultomtar ska bli det krävs det mycket arbete. Ta en titt på det här.
School is in session for these 6 Santas in London, from perfecting their ho-ho-hos to memorizing all the reindeer names. Santa School aims to get Santas all trained up for Christmas Eve. The program is run by James Lovell, Chief Santa Trainer for over 25 years and Creative Director at entertainment company Fiji Mermaid.
Any child that goes, there's a massive build-up. Any child that goes to see Father Christmas has been excited about this for days, for weeks, maybe months. So it has to live up to their expectations, which is why from the moment a child walks into a grotto to meet Father Christmas, the experience is magical. So you need to look good, you need to sound good, you need to be kind, you need to be magical, you need to be jolly.
There are certain rules that Santas must follow. One of them is never asking the child what they want for Christmas.
You shouldn't actually ask them what they want for Christmas, because most children have written you a letter. And if you're asking them what they want for Christmas, you're basically saying you haven't read their letter, which is rude.
Lovell said his bookings were up 25% this year. He suspects one of the reasons for this is that people just need to feel more jolly.
This year, there are a lot of not very nice things going on in the world, and I think people are looking for Father Christmas to bring them a little bit of joy.
It's hard work for these Santas and their elves. When they graduate, they'll be all set to ring in the season.
Tack för att ni har tittat och på återseende.